Hello and welcome to Sideline Story, your destination for sports news, analysis, and discussions. I'm Yang Guang. This week, we will zoom in onto the latest anti-tanking plans by the NBA. Will the new rules be the game changer? How much has tanking harmed the game? To unpack the questions, I'm joined here by my fantastic co-hosts Tian Yu and Brandon Yates. All right, the NBA is planning to make several rule changes to curb tanking from teams. Several options on the table and under consideration, including flattening the spread of odds for all lottery teams, freezing those odds at the trade deadline or another date in season, and no longer allowing a franchise to pick into the top 4 in consecutive years or after consecutive bottom 3 finishes. On paper, these rules are meant to, discourage losing or deliberate losing. But in practice, Tianyu, what grades would you give to the league for these moves? Are these rules genuinely changing team behavior, or are they just band-aid to a systemic issue?
So I think overall it should be a positive signal for the league because I think right now, let's be honest, the incentive structure is kind of broken. So the reward for losing is sometimes better than the reward for being middle level. So if you're stuck in that 9 to 12 range, that means you're basically not contending and you're not getting elite draft odds. So I think the teams just naturally wonder, why not just bottom out? We've seen it pretty clearly this season because Utah and Indiana, they're sitting key players late in the games, and the Wizards basically just gaming the system by bringing injured players and keeping them shut down when they could probably play. So I think I get why those small market teams, they choose to tank, because when you're not a free agent destination like LA or Miami or the Golden State, the draft is kind of like your lifeline. In terms of the question, will the anti-tanking rules fully work? I don't think it will go completely smooth sail, but because I think teams are very smart, they can always find loopholes in the systems. But I think even shifting the incentive slightly towards competing would help, and because I think it's a step in the right direction.
Right. Well, these measures are considered in response to the persistence and increase in NBA teams or allegedly tanking to ensure better draft lottery odds. The league has owned up to the issue, with Commissioner Adam Silver saying the problems are worse this year than we've seen in recent memory. For example, as you mentioned, the Utah Jazz and Indiana Pacers have been fined $500,000 and $100,000 respectively earlier this month for conduct detrimental to the league related to the player participation policy.
Yes.
Utah, in particular, said its 2 best players, Laurie McConaughey and Jaren Jackson Jr., for the entire 4th quarter of back-to-back games that were both winnable. To me, that's deliberate losing.
Yeah.
And some teams like the Dallas Mavericks, Washington Wizards, the Sacramento Kings, they already announced their star players, Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis, Sabonis, they would be receiving surgery. That means their season is over. Phoenix Suns owner Matt Ishbia said in a social media post that tanking was losing behavior done by losers and much worse than any prop bet scandal. So, Brandon, it seems like the problem is very common now in the league. Do you think these rule changes can flip that script?
Well, let's remember that all of this is potential, right? So I don't think anything has come out in terms of what is going to definitely happen to counter this very unique, strange problem. Whereas I don't know many sporting codes around the world where losing or going on a bad streak is actually beneficial for a team's future. So I guess that's just the way that the NBA is set up. But it's just I think if you're outside of the United States, it's just a weird way of operating. Someone like me from South Africa, it's kind of traditional. It's kind of like the Premier League. The richest team gets to buy the richest players, and that's kind of it. Whereas the NBA and a couple of other sports in the US operate on a supposedly more fair playing ground in terms of player selection and that sort of thing, particularly when it comes to players that are not in the league. But as as you've both mentioned, there are ways of beating the system, and unfortunately, a part of that is sometimes allegedly losing on purpose, which highly competitive, results-driven country like the US, it's just a weird phenomenon for me. But anyway, you guys have already mentioned that Adam Silver has come out and said that it is problematic, and he's also supposedly spoken to all 30 GMs and said that new anti-tanking measures are coming. Whenever new regulations come into the NBA or any similar sporting code that has similar rules, particularly in the US, there do always seem to be loopholes. And, you can't really blame teams for trying to make the most of the loopholes. If you're a GM or, an owner, you want to do what's best for you and your franchise. So it's the responsibility of the NBA to counter any measures that may be detrimental to the league. It's not the responsibility of the actual franchises, in my opinion. But some of the potential measures to come in to counter some of these, tanking issues are there's a couple of reported ideas that may be put into measure next season, which includes, limiting pick protections. So only top 4 outside the lottery are allowed, freezing lottery odds at a certain date, so maybe a trade deadline or similar. No top 4 picks after consistent poor finishes or after a deep playoff run. Lottery odds based on multi-year records. Flattening lottery odds across all eligible teams. And finally, including play-in teams in the lottery. So these are just some of the proposals that are supposedly aimed at reducing incentives to lose games late in the season, which, even as the words are coming out of my mouth, what a bizarre sort of incentive to have. The only similar thing that I can think of, it just comes to mind now. I've made it very clear that I'm a Manchester United fan. And I always think, like, I hate it when we play Europa League. So when we're sitting in like the top 5, I would rather us be Champions League or not in the Europa League. You know what I mean? Like, we either in first flight Europe or not in Europe at all, and we just focus on the Premier League. So whenever we're battling for like top 5, top 6, I always think, oh, it would be great if we just lost like the last
yeah
5 or 6 games. If we have no chance of qualifying for the top 4, so that next season at least we can just focus on the Prem and have the best chance of finishing at top 4. Whereas if you've got a limited squad and you're playing Europa League, which is like the best of the losers, and then Premier League and this, it becomes too much. So I know it's not really similar, but I can see why sometimes losing can be an incentive. I think it's it's kind of similar. But yeah, I think where some of these measures might help. I think when it comes to flattening odds, where everyone has roughly an equal chance, I think that potentially could discourage deliberate losses, since being slightly worse doesn't help that much. Multi-year records will reduce the reward for a single bad season. So I think that's also something that could be potentially beneficial. And then finally, freezing odds early eliminates late season manipulation. And I think that's probably the critical element, is that I think the NBA is very concerned about manipulating results in a negative way to benefit your team. It's very like counterintuitive. And I think for the good of the game and the good for competition, even if it is going to benefit a certain franchise, for the game and for the actual league itself, it doesn't put out a pretty image. It doesn't give the league a very beneficial image, I would say. But then again, there's also other things to consider that might also not work well with some of these proposed rule changes to counter tanking. So, for example, rules preventing teams from having high picks on multiple consecutive years might punish legitimately rebuilding teams, potentially slowing competitive balance. So that is one kind of counter argument. Early freezing of odds doesn't eliminate all incentives, right, to lose games earlier in the season, which, there's a variety of other reasons for that, which is also bizarre, but I guess it's just a part of the game. And then finally, if penalties are only fines, teams still may lose strategically if the draft reward outweighs the fine. So that's the thing. I think some of these fines that have been going around, teams will be happy to pay these fines because they know that what they will gain from a higher draft pick will outweigh any potential fine. I mean, if you're moving up in the draft pick lottery, a fine is like a drop in the ocean compared to what you might gain from improving your odds at getting a better draft pick. So can all of these potential incentives work? Partially, but not perfectly. I think the league is essentially trying to make losing less valuable than competing, which I think is a commendable thing to try and do. I think that it is, even though the potential ideas that are being floated around are not necessarily perfect. I think the actual what they are trying to do, I think, is commendable. So even though they might not succeed, at least they are trying to tackle the problem. I think that's the main thing. And then even if it doesn't work in the first season, they might eventually come up with something that levels the playing field again and makes things a little bit more competitive and less counterproductive for the league overall.
Right. Now let's talk about fan experience. We often talk about, tanking from the front office asset management perspective, but for a fan who pays for a
Yeah.
ticket or a league pass to watch a team deliberately field a non-competitive roster on the floor and deliberately lose the game, it feels like a betrayal to me. So, Tianyu, how much do you think tanking has eroded the fundamental, entertainment contract between the team and its fan base?
Well, yeah. First of all, I don't think tanking has destroyed the league or anything dramatic like that. I think the NBA is still very talented and still very fun to watch. But I think one thing is very certain: tanking is definitely slowly making the viewing experience worse. Because late in the season, especially, you have games where one team is clearly not trying to win. So what's the point of watching it if you know the other team is clearly tanking? And also, it also affects the playoffs races too. If one contender gets to play a tanking team, resting half his roster while another contender doesn't, that's competitive imbalance. That's just unfair. Fans
Just interrupt
can
you there for a second, Tianyu. I'm a pretty casual NBA fan, but when we discuss what tanking actually is this not match fixing?
to some degree, it really is. It's totally
And like, can you imagine if this was happening in football? Teams would be relegated and banned. And
yeah.
I think this is, in my opinion, I think this is almost as bad. And we also have to remember this is all alleged. Teams are allegedly feeling weaker teams and players are allegedly unavailable. But when you get down to it and you see how consistently it's happening and how allegedly predetermined it is, it really does come across as a form of match fixing to me.
Yeah, that's totally against the spirit of sportsmanship.
You need some subtle ways to tank.
Yeah.
You can't deliberately, pitch the five like G League players on the floor. That's too obvious.
Yeah.
Too obvious.
Yeah. Fans are not fools. We can feel when games aren't fully real.
All right, before we move on, here's a quick review of the biggest sports headlines in the past week in China and around the world. The 2026 Milano Cortina Olympic Winter Games have concluded with the closing ceremony in Italy's ancient Verona Arena. China concluded the games with 15 medals, 5 gold, 4 silver and 6 bronze, marking its best performance at an overseas Winter Olympics. Ken Brown looks back at Team China's highlights during the 17-day competition.
Su Yiming set off a Chinese gold rush when he dazzled in the men's snowboard slopestyle final. Then Xu Mengtao soared to gold in the freestyle ski aerials. 2 days later, her husband Wang Xingdi claimed gold in the men's event. Speed skater Ning Zhongyan slid to gold in the men's 1500 meters, and Eileen Gu saved her best for last, winning gold in the freestyle ski halfpipe to add to her 2 silver medals in the slopestyle and big air, ensuring China had its most successful foreign winter games ever.
The next edition of the Winter Games will be hosted in the French Alps in 2030. The United States ended a nearly half-century wait for Olympic men's ice hockey gold with a 2-1 overtime victory against Canada, with Jack Hughes delivering their 3rd title and first since 1980 with the winning shot. It came down to the 3-on-3 play when Hughes scored 1 minute and 41 seconds into the extra period. Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao will face off in a professional rematch at the Sphere in Las Vegas in September. The fight marks Mayweather's return from retirement. Mayweather, who holds a perfect 50-0 record with 27 knockouts, defeated Pacquiao in their 2015 encounter dubbed the Fight of the Century. Bodo Glimt dumped last season's finalist Inter Milan out of the Champions League with a remarkable 2-1 win at the San Siro in their playoff second leg that sealed a stunning 5-2 aggregate triumph. Bodo Glimt coach Kjetil Knutsen says the team played its best over the 2 legs.
I think it's an amazing evening for the club, for the players, for the town, and also for Norwegian football. But We are now talking about goals, and we are talking about how to perform and how we can take steps and develop the players and the team.
The Norwegian sides have been the fairy tale story of this season's competition, having sneaked into the playoffs with stunning victories over Manchester City and Atletico Madrid in their final 2 league phase matches. China's men's basketball team has announced its 14-player roster for the second window of the 2027 FIBA World Cup Asian qualifiers. The final squad includes Zhao Jiwei, Hu Jinqiu, and Hu Mingxuan. The team has now departed for Okinawa, Japan. Another defeat could drop them to 4th, ending their hopes of advancing. Welcome back. Now shifting to the ethical side of things. We talked about it. Is tanking a very smart business move, or does it undermine the integrity of competition? You see, we saw some teams like OKC becoming very successful after years of struggling on the table, but earning some very good draft picks. I guess they really benefited from this system. They are a very good example of how these rules help teams, especially weaker teams, rebuild and ensure the quality in the league. But meantime, we also have teams like the Pelicans, who never really built a competitive squad, though they earned some really good draft picks over the years. So Tianyu, where's the line between a responsible rebuild and tanking? Is the pursuit of generational talent like Victor Wembanyama or LeBron James worth the collateral damage of a lost season?
Well, I think this is where things can get pretty nuanced, because I think rebuilding is absolutely fair. I mean, if you're if imagine you're a team owner, and if your best players, even at their peak, um they can only get you to the play-in and not to real championship contention, then it might be smarter to start over instead. Kind of instead of pretending you're close, you trade your veterans, rely on young players, and accept short-term pain. That's, I would call, smart management. But I think rebuilding and tanking aren't the same thing, because rebuilding is saying we are young, we are developing, and we might lose a lot, but we are competing. But tanking is more like we are going to manipulate outcomes. So I think the line to me is the intent. Are you losing because you're not good enough yet? Or are you losing because you want to take advantage of the outcomes? So sitting healthy players late in close games, or holding out players who can clearly play, that's clearly tanking, and that's quite unacceptable to me. So is it technically allowed? I think it's yes. But is it within the competitive spirit? That's very much debatable. And I think the truth is, the NBA system almost forces every team into this logic.
Exactly.
Yeah, if being worse gives you a way better shot at landing a star player at your team, teams are going to chase losses. So I don't think it's about blaming the teams. It's about designing incentives that don't reward intentional losing.
It's impossible to talk about tanking without a deep dive into the Philadelphia 76ers iconic process. They tanked for several consecutive seasons to earn draft picks and made it even a public move. Brandon, was it necessary evil that was ultimately vindicated, or did it do lasting damage to the league's competitive integrity?
First of all, let's not pretend that these teams give a damn about ethics or about the competitiveness of the game or about what's good for the sport. These are businesses, these are competitive teams. They want to do what's best for not just for their team in terms of success and potential of winning titles, but also what's good for the pocket. So I think that in terms of the competitiveness of the league and the good moral standing and ethics of the league, again, it's a league problem. And if I'm a team owner and I see, okay, these are the rules, these are ways that I can manipulate the rules to benefit my team, I'm definitely doing that. I'm not going to be like, oh, let me be more concerned about the well-being of the league and the competitive spirit, and I don't give a damn about that. I want to do what's best for my financial, for my investors, for the potential success of my team to be able to get, the best drop. That's the thing. Like the rules are set up to make teams as selfish as possible. So look, I think any legal evil is justified in the league, not in life. In the NBA. Let's try and promote good ethics in life. Maybe not necessarily in the NBA, but so I think when it comes to the NBA, I think teams, and they've got incredibly intelligent, people behind the scenes in terms of people that know how to set up the team in a certain way, people that know what to do in terms of the financial health of the team going forward. There's so many different minds within a franchise with so many different ambitions and targets in mind that they will bend rules and figure out ways to do what is best for them. So I don't necessarily have a problem with any team doing anything to benefit themselves that is not against the rules. So I think that anything that needs to be done to create a more positive spirited, less tanking environment needs to come from the NBA. And again, we've explained why it is so difficult to come up with things. I mean, for example, a very maybe rudimentary, basic idea that pops into my mind is like, why don't we just have every single draft pick be a lottery? So when number one comes along, you have a lottery. Who comes out first gets the first pick. You have another. I mean, the draft would probably take 7 days to complete, but at least then it would. Would that not be a completely even playing field when it comes to draft picks? So I'm not sure. Look, I'm sure Commissioner Silver would come out to be like, well, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard, and this is why we don't do it. And I'm sure that whoever is within the NBA higher ups and decision making, fields, I'm sure that everything that is as it is has a good reason. But I think that a lot of consideration and a lot of spitballing and brainstorming, I think a lot of that needs to be done. I think you need to get a room of guys together and actually just bounce ideas around, because I think that all of the ideas that are coming around right now that we listed earlier within the podcast, they aren't necessarily solutions. They're more like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen that meme where like there's a big water bottle and there's water coming out of the water bottle and someone sticks it with a piece of sticky tape, to try and like solve the problem. Like that doesn't solve the problem. That's just a temporary solution to a ongoing problem.
Yeah.
Right. It makes us wonder, if we were given the power to rewrite rules tomorrow, what's the most, a radical solution to eliminate tanking for good? My suggestion here, forget about draft lottery for a second. How about a system where the draft order is determined by the performance of those teams who are eliminated from the playoff contention?
Yeah.
I mean, only those teams who fight for a spot for the playoff can earn draft picks. I guess that's a good incentive.
Yeah.
Or a real drafts where the picks rotate among the teams regardless of records. So Tianyu, any good ideas from your side?
Well, yeah, I think one way, like people always bring up, is flattening lottery odds even more. Like making the difference between the worst team and say the 8th worst team minimal. So if the upside of tanking is like tiny, I don't think teams would sacrifice a whole season for it. And also another idea is a draft tournament. Like you said, once teams are eliminated from playoffs, they compete for draft positioning. I think that would flip the incentive completely, because now winning a game actually helps you in the draft slot instead of hurting it. So I think it would be chaotic at first, but it would be kind of fun to watch. So I think the tricky part here is we don't want to hurt those small market teams permanently. The draft is still the main path for these small market teams to get access to franchise players. Whatever system you design has to preserve equality for every team. So ultimately, I think the goal shouldn't be to eliminate losing seasons. I think that's impossible. But the goal should be to eliminate the benefits of intentional losing. So make competing the smartest move, even for bad teams.
Yeah. Or should we forget about equality? I mean, in football leagues like the Premier League,
Yeah.
it's market driven, it's
Yeah.
market oriented.
It's a business game.
let the capital work.
But again, then that also might also reduce the competitiveness of games, right? So I think that's what also fans are complaining about, is that tanking is reducing competitiveness. And I think that, having just a handful of powerful teams within the NBA also reduces competitiveness. And we also have to remember that football is huge and worldwide, right? So even if they are just a handful of powerful clubs, you probably find it's like 20 to 30 clubs worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the NBA, if it's only like 5 or 6 teams that are competing for the championship every year, then that could also be very boring and also lead to other teams potentially capitulating entirely.
Yeah, let's see if the new rules will change the game, and hopefully we will say goodbye to tanking or less tanking. With that, we end this episode of Sideline Story. Thank you so much for joining us. Subscribe to Sideline Story and leave your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information, you can also check our website at radio.cgtn.com. Until next time, stay on the sidelines with us.